Right. So have you ever heard of a court like so powerful it can hold even world leaders accountable
Wow.
for like the worst crimes,
Yeah.
genocide, war crimes, all that heavy stuff?
Yeah.
That's the International Criminal Court, the ICC.
Right.
And today's deep dive, well, it's all about the ICC.
Okay.
Specifically about the sanctions former U.S. President Trump just kind of slapped on it.
Interesting.
We've got a whole bunch of sources to unpack here.
Okay.
News reports, reactions from world leaders. We even got some perspectives from human rights groups.
Sounds good.
So by the end of this deep dive, you'll know why these sanctions are causing such a fuss, what they could mean for the ICC going forward, and how this whole thing shows some pretty serious tension in global politics.
Okay, I'm ready.
So the news dropped February 6th, 2025. Trump signs this executive order and authorizes sanctions against ICC officials. We're talking asset freezes, travel bans, even potentially targeting their families.
Wow.
This is serious stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because this isn't the first time that Trump has clashed with the ICC.
Right.
Back in 2020, he took similar actions against ICC officials investigating those alleged U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan.
Right. And this really highlights the U.S.'s uneasy relationship with the ICC historically.
Yeah, definitely. There's a deep concern in the U.S. about the potential for politically motivated prosecutions.
Yeah.
Worries about giving up, some of its sovereignty.
Okay, so why these new sanctions now? What's the official justification?
Well, the executive order accuses the ICC of illegitimate and baseless actions, targeting both the U.S. and Israel.
And it seems like a big trigger was that arrest warrant that the ICC issued for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu
Right.
back in November 2024, alleging war crimes in Gaza.
Yeah, the arrest warrant was definitely a turning point. It's worth mentioning, though, that the ICC investigation into the Gaza war wasn't just focused on Israel.
Right.
They also issued an arrest warrant for a Hamas commander.
So they are trying to hold all sides accountable.
Exactly, that's the goal.
Let's talk about how the world reacted to Trump's order, because it's been mixed, to say the least.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Everything from praise to very fierce condemnation.
So Netanyahu, for example, was thrilled, called Trump Israel's greatest friend.
Right?
But then you have human rights groups like Amnesty International.
Yeah.
They're accusing Trump of undermining international justice and suggesting that this, makes Israel look untouchable. And world leaders' reactions are varied, too. For example, you have German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He warned that these sanctions, put an institution meant to hold dictators accountable at risk.
Right.
Then there's UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. His spokesperson came out strong, affirming support for the ICC's independence. So it seems like even close U.S. allies aren't on the same page here.
Yeah, and what's really striking is the coalition of 79 countries.
Wow.
Including key U.S. allies like the UK, France, Germany, who issued a joint statement condemning Trump's move.
Wow, 79 countries.
Yeah, and they warned about the dangers of letting serious crimes go unpunished.
You don't see that kind of unity every day.
Yeah.
Especially not against a powerhouse like the U.S.
Yeah, it's significant. It suggests growing global concern about the implications of these sanctions. And, to have so many nations, including traditional U.S. allies, come together like this is pretty unprecedented.
On the other hand, though, you have countries like Australia, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Italy who stayed silent.
Yeah.
So it really underscores the deep divisions this whole situation has exposed.
For sure.
Okay, so we've got the sanctions, these strong reactions, but what could the real-world fallout be? How will this actually affect the ICC?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
These sanctions could really hamper the ICC's ability to conduct investigations. Imagine trying to do your job with travel bans, frozen assets, the worry that your family might be targeted.
Right.
It's like a chilling effect.
And it's not just the investigators themselves. What about people who might be willing to testify, to come forward with crucial information?
Yeah, you're right. Potential witnesses might think twice.
Yeah.
Afraid of getting caught up in the sanctions. It also puts a huge financial strain on the court's operations. Just operating.
And there's that detail in the order that requires the U.S. Treasury to submit a list of additional persons for potential sanctions within 60 days.
Right.
So this isn't just a one-time hit. This is an ongoing threat.
Yeah, and knowing Trump's, tendency to use threats and unpredictability as leverage,
Right.
It creates this constant uncertainty and fear within the ICC.
So to get the full weight of this situation, let's rewind a bit. Look at the history of the U.S. and the ICC. It's been a bumpy ride, to say the least.
Yeah, it's an understatement. The U.S. initially signed the Rome Statute.
Right.
That's the treaty that created the ICC under President Clinton.
Right.
But it never actually ratified it.
Then President Bush came in and not only pulled the U.S. signature, but actively campaigned against the court.
Yeah, there's always been this strong resistance to the ICC from certain corners of U.S. politics.
And even the Biden administration, although they lifted the sanctions that Trump imposed in 2020,
Right.
they still weren't exactly happy about the ICC's investigations into Israel.
Right. It shows how deep this tension is.
So all this history considered, these latest sanctions feel like the culmination of years of this friction.
Yeah, it's definitely a turning point in their relationship.
And it raises a big question. What does this mean for the very idea of international justice and, the balance of power globally?
That's what we need to think about.
If a court like the ICC, designed to be the ultimate arbiter of justice, can be undermined by powerful names, then what hope is there for holding leaders accountable for, the worst kinds of crimes?
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. It leads to a much bigger conversation about the future of international law and how we as a global community ensure justice for the most serious crimes.
We'll dig into all that in a bit. So we've been talking about sanctions and power struggles and the future of international justice.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It is. It is. And it's easy to get caught up in the immediate news cycle, right?
Yeah.
But this situation has much deeper implications, I think. It's like we're seeing a tiny piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Okay, so zoom out for us then. What's the bigger picture?
I think what we're seeing here is a shift in global power. You have new players are challenging the dominance of Western nations, and this tension is playing out in institutions like the ICC.
So the ICC is kind of caught in the middle of this global power shift.
Yeah, precisely. It's facing pressure from countries who feel that they're being unfairly targeted or that the court is overstepping its bounds.
And in this case, you have Trump, with his America First approach, essentially saying the ICC has no authority over the U.S. or its allies.
Yeah, it's a very unilateral approach to international relations.
Right.
Trump's actions send a clear message. The U.S. will act in its own interest, even if it means, sidelining institutions that it sees as a threat.
And this isn't just about the U.S., right?
Yeah.
This could have, ripple effects on the ICC's relationship with other powerful nations.
Absolutely.
Who might be wary of its reach.
Yeah, this situation could embolden other countries to push back against the ICC or even withdraw their support completely.
Which would be a pretty devastating blow to the court's legitimacy and ability to even function.
Exactly. The ICC relies on cooperation from states to investigate, to enforce its rulings. So if powerful nations start turning away, it really weakens the court's authority on the global stage.
So Trump's actions could, potentially weaken the entire system of international justice that the ICC represents.
Yeah, that's a real concern. And it raises some, very deep questions.
Yeah.
If national interests constantly override international law, then what's left to ensure justice for victims of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity?
It's a pretty bleak thought.
It is, but it's important to remember that the ICC still has a significant amount of support from many countries and organizations all around the world.
Yeah, we saw that with the joint statement condemning Trump's sanctions.
Right.
There's a global movement pushing back against impunity.
For sure.
Advocating for a stronger international justice system.
And that's where you, the listener, come in. This isn't just about diplomats and lawyers arguing in courtrooms, right? This is about very fundamental values: justice, accountability, and the rule of law.
So it's about whether we as a global community are really committed to holding our leaders, even the most powerful ones, accountable for their actions.
And that's not something that governments can just decide on their own. It requires public pressure, informed debate, and a commitment to holding those in power accountable.
So what can our listeners do? What actions can they take to make a difference?
Well, for starters, just being aware of the issues is crucial.
Right.
Understanding the arguments, the potential consequences, that's the foundation.
Right. Knowledge is power. But then there's the power of actually making your voice heard, right?
Yeah.
Contacting your elected officials, supporting organizations working on international justice, having these informed conversations. These things can actually have a real impact.
Yeah, it's also about holding, ourselves accountable.
Yeah.
Challenging narratives that dehumanize certain groups, advocating for policies that promote human rights.
Right.
examining our own biases. These are all part of, building a more just world.
So it's not enough to just sit back and expect international institutions to solve these really complicated problems.
Yeah.
It takes active citizenship, it takes critical thinking, and it takes a willingness to challenge injustice wherever we see it.
This deep dive has given you a glimpse into, a very complex situation. It's a story that's still unfolding.
Right.
And the ending is far from certain.
But as we've explored these issues, one thing is clear, right?
Yeah.
The fight for international justice, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
It requires sustained effort, vigilance, and a belief that we can make a difference.
And the choices we make, both individually and collectively, will determine the course of this struggle for years to come.
So we've talked a lot about the potential downsides of these sanctions.
Right.
But what are the flip side? Like, what are some potential positives that might come out of this situation?
That's a great question. Sometimes even negative events can spark positive change. These sanctions could actually galvanize support for the ICC.
You mean like a rally around the flag kind of effect?
Exactly. The international community might see these sanctions as an attack on the very idea of international justice and respond with even stronger support for the court.
Okay, so increased international support for the ICC.
Yeah.
That's one positive outcome. What else?
This situation could also force a much-needed conversation about the ICC's role in global governance. Maybe this will push the court to reflect on its practices, address some criticisms, and ultimately emerge stronger, more effective.
So a chance for reflection and improvement.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, sometimes you have to break something to fix it.
Right. And even though the situation looks bleak now, remember that the ICC has shown resilience in the past. It's faced challenges, and it's come out stronger.
And speaking of the ICC's track record, I think it's worth taking a moment to highlight some of their successes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
After all, it's easy to get bogged down in all the negativity.
Yeah, it's important to acknowledge the court's achievements. They've secured convictions for war crimes, crimes against humanity, even genocide.
Right.
Those convictions send a powerful message that even in the darkest corners of the world, justice can prevail.
Yeah, it's proof that the ICC can make a real difference in the lives of victims and their families.
And even beyond the individual cases, the very existence of the ICC has a deterrent effect. It puts perpetrators on notice. They can't just operate with impunity. Their actions will have consequences.
So even if the ICC can't prosecute every case, just the threat of investigation could prevent future atrocities.
Exactly. And it's not just about the court itself, right? There's this growing global movement for accountability, for justice. Human rights organizations, civil society groups, everyday citizens, they're all playing this vital role in pushing for a world where those who commit the most serious crimes are held responsible.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that change doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It requires sustained effort, collective action, and a belief that a more just world is possible.
This deep dive has provided a glimpse into a very complex and evolving situation. It's a story that's still being written, and the outcome is far from certain.
But as we've explored these issues, one thing has become clear.
Yeah.
The fight for international justice is a long game.
Absolutely.
And it requires that sustained effort, vigilance, and a belief in the power of collective action to hold the powerful to account.
And the choices that we make, both individually and collectively, will determine the course of this struggle for years to come.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the breaking news, delved into the historical context, and we've discussed the potential consequences of Trump's sanctions, both positive and negative.
We've examined the arguments for and against the ICC, the challenges it faces, and the reasons why it remains this vital institution despite its imperfections.
We even touched on some of the ICC's achievements, reminding ourselves that amidst all this uncertainty, there's still hope.
But we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
There's so much more to learn, so much more to discuss.
And that's where you, the listener, come in.
Right.
Continue to engage with these issues, stay informed, challenge your own assumptions, and use your voice to advocate for a world where justice prevails. This deep dive has given you the knowledge, the context to understand this complex situation.
Now it's up to you to decide what you do with it. We've given you the tools.
Now go out there and make a difference. So we've covered so much. Sanctions, global power struggles, the future of international justice. It's a lot to think about.
It can be overwhelming, yeah. But even with all that, I think there's some hope here.
I'm listening. What gives you hope?
Well, the resilience of the ICC, and the commitment of everyone who believes in what it's doing. Despite the political pressure, budget issues, threats to their safety, they keep pushing for justice.
It's like they're saying we're not going anywhere.
Exactly. And let's not forget, they've had some big wins along the way, right? They've gotten convictions for war crimes, crimes against humanity, even genocide. Those convictions, they send a powerful message that even in the most difficult situations, justice can win.
Yeah. Real proof that the ICC can make a difference in the lives of victims and their families.
And even beyond the individual cases, just the existence of the ICC, right? It has a deterrent effect. It lets people who might commit these crimes know they can't just act without consequence. There might be consequences.
So even if they can't prosecute every case, the threat of investigation might stop future atrocities.
That's the hope. And it's not just the court itself. There's this whole global movement growing around accountability, around justice. Human rights organizations, regular people, they're all pushing for a world where those responsible for the worst crimes are held accountable.
It reminds us that change takes time and effort, right? It takes collective action and a belief that a more just world is possible.
Now looking ahead, it's crucial to see how the world responds to Trump's sanctions. Will countries stand with the ICC? Or will they bow to pressure?
Yeah, and how will the ICC adapt to these challenges? Can it continue to work effectively in these new circumstances?
Big questions. The stakes are really high here. This will have a huge impact on international justice and the world we live in.
We've learned a lot today. Breaking news, historical context, the consequences of Trump's sanctions, the positive and the negative.
Yeah, we've really dug into the arguments for and against the ICC, the challenges it faces, and why it's such a vital institution, even with its problems.
We even talk about the ICC's successes, reminding ourselves that amidst all this uncertainty, there's still hope.
But we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, there's always more to learn, more to discuss.
And that's where you come in.
Keep learning about these issues. Stay informed, challenge your own assumptions, and use your voice to fight for a world where justice wins. This deep dive has given you the knowledge you need to understand this complex situation.
And now it's up to you. What do you do with it? We've given you the tools.
Go make a difference.